Kim Tae-ho felt his stomach drop as the transport shuttle's engines finally went quiet. Through the small window, he could see Kepler Station stretching out like a massive metal city floating in space. This was it, the Galactic Defense Academy, where only the strongest warriors from across the galaxy came to train. He grabbed his old duffel bag and stepped through the shuttle door. The first thing that hit him was the noise. The main hall was huge, with a ceiling so high he had to crane his neck to see the top. Everywhere he looked there were aliens, not the friendly kind from movies. These were soldiers, warriors, fighters, and they were all massive. To his left, a group of Krillian warriors stood in formation. Each one was at least 7 feet tall, with thick armor-like skin and 4 powerful arms. Their faces looked like they were carved from stone, all sharp angles and scars. To his right, the Gorvani shock troops were even bigger, 8-foot-tall giants with muscles that looked like they could crush a car. Their grey skin was covered in ritual tattoos that marked their battle victories. Then there were the Zephyrites, who looked like walking crystals. They were quieter than the others, but their bodies sparkled with an inner light that somehow felt dangerous. When they moved, they made a soft chiming sound that reminded Tae-ho of breaking glass. And there he was, Kim Tae-ho from Seoul, South Korea, Earth. 5 foot 8 inches tall, weighing maybe 150 pounds, soaking wet. In his simple grey cadet uniform, he looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. The laughter started almost immediately. "Well, well, well," came a deep voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Look what crawled out of the Sol system." Tae-ho turned to see Drill Sergeant Vorth approaching. The Krillian was a walking nightmare, nearly 8 feet of scarred armor and attitude. His forearms were crossed, and his black eyes looked at Tae-ho like he was something disgusting stuck to his boot. Another soft skin thinking they can play. "Soldier with real warriors," Vorth continued, his voice getting louder so everyone could hear. "Tell me, little human, did they run out of real recruits and decide to scrape the bottom of the barrel?" The crowd of alien recruits found this hilarious. Their laughter echoed through the hall, clicking sounds from the Zephyrites, deep rumbling from the Gorvani, and harsh barking from the Krillians. Tae-ho felt his face getting hot, but he just nodded politely. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "Cadet Kim Tae-ho reporting for duty." This made them laugh even harder. A particularly large Gorvani pushed through the crowd. His name tag read Thorax, and he had to weigh at least 400 pounds of solid muscle. "Did you hear that?" Thorax bellowed. "It thinks it's actually going to complete training. Hey, Earth boy, try not to break anything on your way to washing out." More laughter. Someone in the back shouted, "How long before it runs home crying to mommy?" Another voice called out, "I give it 3 days." Tae-ho listened to all of this without changing his expression. He reached into his bag and pulled out something that made the aliens pause. A simple paper notebook and an old-fashioned pen in E. A galaxy where everything was digital, where thoughts could be recorded directly into neural interfaces. He was using paper and ink. "What is that thing?" one of the Zephyrites asked, their crystal body flickering with confused colors. "It's called a notebook," Tae-ho explained calmly, opening it to a blank page. Humans sometimes write things down by hand. The aliens exchanged looks of amazement and amusement. This primitive creature was even more backward than they thought. While they had computers built into their brains, he was using tools that were thousands of years old. "Primitive," Vorth snorted. "Just like the rest of your species. Come on, soft skin. Let me show you to your quarters." Tae-ho followed the drill sergeant through the station's corridors. The walls were lined with images of famous graduates, war heroes, fleet commanders, legendary fighters. Not a single human face among them. They took an elevator down, 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 past the main living quarters where the other recruits would stay, past the training levels, all the way to the bottom of the station where the maintenance workers and cleaning staff lived. "Here we are," Vorth said with fake cheerfulness. "Home sweet home." The room was tiny, barely big enough for a bed, a desk, and a small locker. The walls were stained, the air recycler was noisy, and it smelled like industrial cleaner. It was clearly meant as an insult. "The other recruits get better rooms," Tae-ho observed. "The other recruits are real soldiers," Vorth replied. You're just here because some politician thought it would be good publicity to have a human in the academy. Don't worry, you won't be here long enough for it to matter." After the drill sergeant left, Tae-ho sat on his narrow bed and opened his notebook. He wrote the date at the top of the page, then began recording everything he had observed: the layout of the station, the different species and their apparent hierarchies, the way they moved, talked and interacted with each other. Most importantly, he wrote down their reactions to him: how they laughed, what they said, how they looked at him. Every detail went into his notebook in neat, careful handwriting. Someone knocked on his door. Tae-ho opened it to find a maintenance worker, one of the few humans on the station. "Heard we got a new human recruit," the man said. "Name's Park Min-woo. I work in engineering." "Kim Tae-ho," he replied, shaking hands. "Nice to meet another human." Min-woo looked around the tiny room and shook his head. "They really stuck it to you, didn't they? This used to be a storage closet." "It's fine," Tae-ho said. "I don't plan to spend much time here anyway." "Listen, kid," Min-woo said seriously. "I've been on this station for 5 years. I've seen 3 humans try to make it through the academy. None of them lasted more than a month. These aliens, they don't just want you to fail, they want to break you, make an example of you." Tae-ho nodded thoughtfully. "What happened to the other humans?" "First one quit after a week, couldn't handle the harassment. Second one tried to fight back, ended up in the medical bay for a month before they sent him home. Third one, well, let's just say he had a nervous breakdown." "Thank you for the warning," Tae-ho said, "but I'm not going anywhere." Min-woo studied his face for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, kid, but when you need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." After Min-woo left, Tae-ho went back to his notebook. He added notes about the human maintenance staff, their positions on the station, and their experiences with the academy. Everything was potentially useful information. A loud chime announced the dinner hour. Tae-ho made his way to the mess hall, where hundreds of alien recruits were already eating. The room went quiet when he entered. All eyes followed him as he got his food, a grey paste that was supposed to be nutritionally complete for all species. He found an empty table in the corner and sat down alone. Within minutes, Thorax and several other Gorvani had surrounded him. "Look, boys," Thorax announced loudly. "The human thinks it can eat with real warriors." One of them reached over and knocked Tae-ho's food tray to the floor. The grey paste splattered across his uniform and the deck. "Oops," the alien said with mock innocence. "Clumsy me." Tae-ho looked down at his ruined meal, then back up at the circle of sneering faces. He stood up slowly, picked up his tray and walked back to the food line to get another serving. The aliens watched in confusion. Where was the anger, the tears, the breakdown they were expecting? Instead, Tae-ho simply got new food and found another table. He ate in silence while making mental notes about the incident. Who was involved, how they acted, what their body language revealed about their personalities and weaknesses. When he finished eating, he returned to his room and wrote it all down. Every detail, every word, every gesture. This was just the beginning, and Kim Tae-ho was already learning everything he needed to know about his enemies. The question was, did they realize they were teaching him? 3 weeks had passed since Kim Tae-ho arrived at the Galactic Defense Academy, and they had been the worst 3 weeks of his life. Every morning started with extra cleaning duties, while the other recruits slept in. Every training session ended with equipment failures that only seemed to happen to him. Every meal was eaten alone, while alien voices whispered insults just loud enough for him to hear. But Tae-ho had survived. More than that, he had been watching, learning, taking notes in his little paper notebook. The aliens thought he was writing down his feelings like some kind of diary. They had no idea he was documenting their every weakness. On this particular morning, the recruits were assembled in Training Bay 7, the largest space on the station. The room was big enough to hold a small spaceship, with reinforced walls, and floors designed to withstand heavy weapons testing. At the center of the bay sat something that made even the toughest aliens nervous: the Titan's burden. It looked like a cannon from some ancient warship, thick black metal covered in warning, symbols and energy conduits. The weapon was as long as a car, and thick enough that 2 people couldn't wrap their arms around it. Even sitting on its mounting platform, it seemed to radiate danger. Instructor Kelvar, a veteran Zephyrite whose crystal body bore the scars of a dozen wars, stood beside the weapon with obvious pride. His inner light pulsed slowly as he spoke to the assembled recruits. For 300 years, every class of recruits has faced this challenge, he announced, his voice echoing through the bay. The Titan's burden weighs exactly 2,000 pounds of solid neutronium-reinforced steel. It was forged in the heart of a dying star and has never been lifted by anyone below the rank of Battlemaster. The recruits shifted nervously. Even Thorax, who had been bragging about his strength for weeks, looked uncertain. Each of you will attempt to lift the burden solo, Kelvar continued. This is not just a test of physical strength. It measures your warrior spirit, your determination, your willingness to face the impossible. Some of you will surprise yourselves. Others will learn the meaning of humility. His crystal eyes swept across the crowd and stopped on Taiho. And some will simply confirm what we already knew about their limitations. The other recruits chuckled at this obvious dig at the human. Taiho just nodded politely and continued taking notes. The testing began with the Gorvani, since they were widely considered the strongest species in the galaxy. The first volunteer, a massive warrior named Brutok, approached the weapon with confidence. His grey skin was covered in ritual scars that marked him as a champion back on his homeworld. Brutok wrapped his enormous hands around the burden's grip handles and pulled. His muscles bulged like steel cables under his skin. Veins stood out on his forehead as he strained with everything he had. The weapon shifted slightly on its mount, rising perhaps an inch off the platform before Brutok's grip failed. The burden crashed back down with a sound like thunder. Respectable effort, Kelvar commented, as Brutok staggered away, breathing hard. Next, one by one, the Gorvani stepped forward. Each attempt ended the same way, brief success followed by inevitable failure. The strongest among them, a female named Destruxa who stood nearly 9 feet tall, managed to lift the weapon a full 6 inches before her strength gave out. The crash when it fell shook the entire bay. Next came the Krillians. Their 4 arms gave them a theoretical advantage, but the weight was simply too much. Even Sergeant Vorth, who had been insulting Taiho for weeks, could barely budge the weapon from its rest. Pathetic, he muttered as he walked away, all 4 arms shaking from the effort. The Zephyrite tried a different approach, using their crystalline bodies to distribute the weight more evenly, but their elegant forms weren't built for raw strength. The best they could manage was to make the weapon rock slightly on its platform. As the failures mounted, the mood in the bay grew more intense. Some recruits cheered for their friends. Others made jokes to hide their own nervousness. A few had already started placing bets on who would come closest to actually lifting the thing. Finally, Kelvar consulted his list and called out the name everyone had been waiting to hear. Kim Taiho stepped forward. The bay fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's engines. Every eye turned to watch the small human walk toward the weapon that had defeated warriors 3 times his size. This should be good, Thorax said, loudly breaking the silence. How long before he calls for a medic? I'm betting he can't even get his hands around the grips properly, added another Gorvani. Maybe we should get him a stepladder, suggested a Krillian, causing fresh laughter to ripple through the crowd. Taiho ignored them all. He walked to the weapon platform with the same calm expression he had worn for 3 weeks. Up close, the Titan's burden was even more intimidating. It was taller than he was, and probably weighed more than a small spacecraft. He studied the weapon carefully, noting the grip placement, the balance points, the way it sat on its mounting. His notebook had taught him to observe everything, and this was no different. The other recruits thought he was hesitating out of fear. Any day now, soft skin, Thorax called out, his voice echoing through the bay. Or do you need us to find you a smaller toy? Maybe something more your size, like a water pistol? The crowd laughed at this, but their laughter died when they saw Taiho's reaction. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he was smiling. It wasn't the polite, nervous smile they expected. It was something else entirely, cold, confident, and somehow very dangerous. Actually, Taiho said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet, I think this will do just fine. He reached out and placed his hands on the weapon's grip handles. They were designed for alien hands, too big for human fingers. but he adjusted his grip until he found a position that worked. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if he was preparing for meditation rather than an impossible feat of strength. The bay was completely silent now. Even the usual background chatter had stopped. Hundreds of alien eyes watched the small human standing next to the massive weapon. Something changed in Taeho's posture. It was subtle, a slight shift in his stance, a different angle to his shoulders. But suddenly he didn't look small anymore. He looked focused, dangerous, like a coiled spring ready to unleash its energy. "Come on, human," someone whispered from the crowd. "Just try and get it over with." Taeho opened his eyes, without any visible strain, without any dramatic grunting or straining. He lifted the Titan's burden clean off its mounting platform. 2,000 pounds of neutronium-reinforced steel rose into the air as if it weighed nothing at all. But he didn't stop there. As the crowd watched in stunned silence, Taeho hefted the massive weapon like it was a training sword. He shifted it from one hand to the other, testing its balance. Then, in a display that would be talked about for years to come, he spun the entire cannon in a complete circle above his head before gently setting it back down on its platform. The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear individual heartbeats. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Taeho dusted off his hands and looked around at the stunned faces surrounding him. His smile had changed again. Now it held just a hint of amusement, as if he had enjoyed watching their assumptions crumble. "Is that all?" he asked politely. "Because I have kitchen duty in 20 minutes and I'd hate to be late." The spell broke. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, voices raised in shock, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. How was it possible? What kind of creature could lift 2,000 pounds like it was nothing? Instructor Kelevar's crystal body was flashing rapidly through different colors, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. He approached Taeho with the careful movements of someone who had just realized they were standing next to a bomb. "How?" was all he managed to say. Taeho shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Earth's gravity is about 2.5 times what you have here on the station. What feels impossible to you is just a normal workout for me." He paused, letting that sink in, then added with that same unsettling smile, "You've all been assuming I'm weak because I'm small, but you never bothered to ask what I'm small compared to." As he walked away, leaving behind a bay full of shocked aliens, Taeho pulled out his notebook and made one final entry for the day. Assumptions can be dangerous. Today they learned that lesson. Tomorrow, we'll see what else they need to learn. The chaos human was no longer the laughingstock of the academy. Now he was something much more interesting and much more dangerous. He was a mystery that demanded to be solved. The silence in Training Bay 7 stretched on like a held breath. Hundreds of alien recruits stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The small human who they had been tormenting for 3 weeks had just lifted a 2,000-pound weapon like it was made of cardboard. Thorax was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How?" The single word cracked as it left his throat, all his earlier bravado completely gone. Taeho looked down at his hands and brushed off some imaginary dust, as calm as if he had just finished a casual morning stretch. When he looked back, up at the crowd, his expression was almost friendly. "It's really quite simple," he said in that same conversational tone he had used when introducing himself 3 weeks ago. "Earth's gravity is about 2.3 times what you consider normal here in the galaxy. What feels impossible to you is what we'd call a light workout back home." The crowd began to stir uneasily. Some of the recruits took half steps backward without realizing it. Others leaned forward, trying to understand what they were hearing. "You see," Taeho continued, reaching into his pocket, "I've been carrying around something much heavier than that weapon every single day of my life. My own body weight. On Earth, I weigh about 350 pounds in local gravity. Here on the station, I weigh maybe 150. It's like I've been wearing a heavy suit my whole life, and you just asked me to take it off." He pulled out his small paper notebook, the same one the aliens had been mocking for weeks. But now, as he opened it, the laughter felt very far away. "But that's not really the interesting part," Taeho said, flipping through pages covered in neat Korean handwriting. "The interesting part is what I've learned about all of you while you were busy making jokes." Brutok, the Gorvani who had failed to lift the weapon earlier, stepped forward with confusion written across his scarred features. "What are you talking about, human?" Teho found a specific page and smiled. "I'm talking about you, Brutok. You favor your right side because of that old injury to your left shoulder, the one you got in the ritual combat trials back home. When you're angry, you unconsciously protect that weak spot, which creates a 0.7-second window where your entire left side is vulnerable to attack." Brutok's massive hands instinctively moved toward his left shoulder. His mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "And thorax," Teho continued, turning to another page, "you have a very predictable pattern when you're frustrated. First you clench your fists, then you shift your weight to your back foot, then you charge forward, in a straight line. It takes you exactly 1.2 seconds from start to finish, and you always aim for the same spot, right where your opponent's head would be if they were standing still." Thorax's face had gone pale gray. You've been watching us?" "Every single day," Teho confirmed cheerfully. "Take Sergeant Vorth, for example." He looked directly at the Krillian drill instructor, whose forearms were now hanging limply at his sides. "Your species has a fascinating weakness. When you're insulted or caught off guard, your nervous system experiences a brief delay, about 0.3 seconds, where your reflexes don't work properly. It's probably an evolutionary defense mechanism, but it makes you very vulnerable in combat situations." Vorth's mandibles clicked nervously. For the first time since Teho had arrived, the drill sergeant seemed at a loss for words. "Then there are the Zephyrite," Teho said, flipping to another section of his notebook. "Your communication system is beautiful, really. The way your crystal bodies resonate with each other to share information instantly. But crystal has a weakness. It vibrates at specific frequencies. Your internal communication network operates at exactly 347.2 Hz. If someone were to say hum at that frequency, it would completely disrupt your ability to coordinate with each other." One of the Zephyrite recruits stepped back, their internal light flickering frantically. That's classified military information. How could you possibly know that?" Teho's smile grew wider. "Because you told me. Not directly, of course. But every time you communicated with each other during training exercises, every time your lights dimmed when there was interference from the station's engines, every reaction to different sounds and frequencies, it all went into my observations." He held up the notebook so everyone could see the pages covered in detailed notes, diagrams, and calculations. 3 weeks of data collection, every insult you threw at me, every training exercise where you thought I was failing, every casual conversation you had while assuming I was too stupid to understand. All of it was valuable intelligence. The implications of what he was saying began to hit the alien recruits like a series of hammer blows. Their weak target hadn't been suffering. In silence, he had been conducting an elaborate intelligence-gathering operation. "IOC," Teho explained, his tone becoming almost professorial. "This notebook isn't just paper and ink, it's connected to something called Aegis, Earth's military artificial intelligence system. Every observation I made, every pattern I noticed, every weakness I discovered has been uploaded and analyzed by computers that can process information faster than any biological brain." Instructor Kelvar's crystal body was now flashing through colors so rapidly it was almost strobing. You're saying this was all planned?" "Oh, absolutely," Teho replied. "Did you really think Earth would send someone to the galaxy's most prestigious military academy without proper preparation? Every moment of harassment you put me through was another data point. Every training exercise was a chance to study your tactics. Every meal where you knocked over my food was an opportunity to observe your pack behavior and social dynamics." He flipped through more pages, each one covered in detailed analysis. The way Krillians stammer when they're caught off guard, how Gorvani pack dynamics shift when they're under stress. You become more aggressive but less coordinated. The specific frequencies that disrupt Zephyrite tactical networks, the psychological triggers that make each species predictable in combat situations. The bay had become so quiet that the soft hum of the station's life support systems seemed loud. Several aliens had backed against the walls, as if they were afraid of getting too close to the human who had been studying them like laboratory specimens. But the most interesting discovery, Tejo continued, closing the notebook with a soft snap that echoed through the silence, was how easily you all revealed your weaknesses when you thought you were in control. Bullies always make the same mistake. They assume their victims are helpless. They never consider that their victim might be the one with the real power. Thorax found his voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You've been analyzing us like enemies. Tejo's expression softened slightly. Not enemies, Thorax. Like future allies who needed to learn an important lesson about respect. You see, Earth has been watching the galactic community for decades. We've studied your wars, your politics, your military strategies. We knew that when we finally introduced ourselves, we would need to prove that humans deserve to be taken seriously. He looked around the room at the stunned faces surrounding him. The 3 human recruits here at the Academy, we're not just students, we're advanced scouts, sent to gather intelligence and establish relationships. My job was to learn everything I could about galactic military culture, while letting you reveal your true natures. The weight of this revelation settled over the crowd like a heavy blanket. The primitive human with his paper notebook had been running circles around them intellectually, while they focused on simple playground bullying. So thank you, Tejo said with genuine warmth in his voice. Thank you for being such excellent and cooperative test subjects. The data you provided will be invaluable when Earth decides how to integrate with galactic civilization. He tucked the notebook back into his pocket and looked around one more time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I mentioned having kitchen duty, and unlike some species I could mention, humans always keep their appointments. As he walked toward the exit, the crowd of alien recruits parted before him like water. No one tried to stop him, no one made any jokes. They just watched in stunned silence, as the small human who had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about warfare disappeared through the doorway. Behind him, he left a bay full of warriors who were beginning to realize they had been playing checkers while he was playing chess. And somewhere in the depths of space, Earth's military computers were already analyzing the data he had gathered, preparing for humanity's next move in the great game of galactic politics. The student had become the teacher, and class was just getting started. 2 days after the Titan's Burden incident, everything at the Academy had changed. The hallways that once buzzed with casual conversation now fell silent whenever Kim Tejo walked by. Alien recruits who had spent 3 weeks treating him like a joke now watched him with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. But Tejo knew that lifting a heavy weapon was just the opening move. The real test would come during actual combat training, where his former tormentors would have a chance to prove that physical strength meant nothing in a real fight. He didn't have to wait long. "Attention all recruits," Instructor Kelvar announced, during morning assembly. His crystal body was still flashing in agitated patterns whenever he looked at Tejo. "Today begins our advanced tactical warfare simulation. You will be divided into squads and deployed across Training Complex Delta for a full-scale war game. The complex was massive, a recreation of an actual battlefield, complete with buildings, trenches, forests, and urban environments. It was designed to test everything the recruits had learned about strategy, teamwork, and combat under pressure. Each squad will be equipped with training weapons that deliver a neural shock instead of lethal damage," Kelvar continued. "When you are killed, you will be temporarily paralyzed and removed from the exercise. The last squad standing wins." Tejo listened carefully as the instructor explained the rules, but his attention was really focused on the team assignments being displayed on the main screen. By what appeared to be random chance, he had been placed on a squad with 3 other species he didn't recognize, apparently exchange students from distant systems. More importantly, the squads he would be facing included Thorax's Gorvani team, Sergeant Vorth's Krillian unit, and a Zephyrite tactical group led by an arrogant crystal warrior named Prism. "Interesting," Tejo murmured to himself, pulling out his notebook to make a quick entry. The random assignment wasn't random at all. Someone wanted to see how the human would perform against his former bullies in actual combat. An hour later, the war games began. Tejo's squad was dropped at the southern edge of the training complex, in a dense forest area that provided good cover but limited visibility. His teammates, a quiet insectoid called Skitter, a gaseous being named Drift, and a rock-like creature called Boulder, looked at him with obvious skepticism. "So you're the human everyone's talking about," Skitter said, her compound eyes reflecting the filtered sunlight. "The one who lifted the burden." "That's me," Tejo replied, checking his training weapon and adjusting the settings. "But strength won't help us much here. This is about tactics and teamwork." Boulder made a grinding sound that might have been laughter. "Easy words. But can you fight as well as you can lift?" Instead of answering directly, Tejo pointed through the trees toward a cluster of buildings about half a mile away. Krillian squad, 12 members, probably setting up a defensive position in that urban sector. They'll expect us to attack. From the east, because that's the most obvious approach. Drift's form shimmered with curiosity. "How can you possibly know that?" Tejo smiled and tapped his temple. "Because I've been studying how they think for 3 weeks. Krillians always choose defensive positions that protect their flanks. It's built into their military culture, but they have a blind spot when it comes to vertical attacks." He opened his notebook and showed them a detailed map he had drawn of the training complex, complete with tactical notes and movement predictions for different species. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, and began explaining a plan that made his teammates' eyes widen with understanding. 20 minutes later, Tejo was moving through the forest alone, heading directly toward the Krillian position. His teammates had thought he was crazy when he suggested splitting up, but now they were seeing the method behind his madness. As he approached the urban sector, he began to whistle softly, a tuneless melody that seemed completely random. But it wasn't random at all. Hidden in the seemingly innocent sound were specific frequencies designed to interfere with Krillian hearing, making it harder for them to pinpoint his exact location. "Contact, South Perimeter," came Sergeant Vorth's voice over the training communication system. "Single human approaching on foot. All units prepare to engage." Tejo smiled and kept walking, now humming instead of whistling. As he got closer to their position, he began calling out in a voice that carried clearly through the urban landscape. "Sergeant Vorth, is that you hiding in there?" "I have to say, I'm disappointed. After all those weeks of telling me how weak humans are, I expected better than cowering behind walls." The reaction was immediate, and exactly what Tejo had expected. Krillian voices erupted in angry clicks and growls. Their disciplined formation began to shift as individual warriors moved toward windows and doorways, eager to get a clear shot. "At the insolent human. He's trying to provoke us," Vorth's voice snapped over the comm. "Hold positions, do not—" "Oh, I get it," Tejo continued, his voice dripping with mock understanding. "You can only fight when your target can't fight back. Makes sense, really. I mean, what's the point of having 4 arms if they're all equally useless?" That did it. The carefully planned defensive formation collapsed as angry Krillians poured out of buildings, their reflex delays triggered by the precisely crafted insults. Instead of coordinated covering fire, they charged forward in a disorganized mob. Tejo was already moving, his human agility allowing him to duck and weave between the slower alien warriors. His training weapon fired with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed at targets whose movements he had predicted weeks in advance. "Target down," he reported calmly into his comm as the first Krillian warrior collapsed, paralyzed by the neural shock. "Target down, target down." Within 3 minutes, half of Vorth's squad was eliminated. The remaining Krillians tried to regroup, but their commander was caught in the same emotional trap as his soldiers. "Stand still and fight like a warrior." Vorth roared, his forearms waving frantically as he tried to get a clear shot. "Why?" Tejo asked pleasantly, rolling behind cover as plasma bolts sizzled past his head. "This is much more fun." He activated his comm system and sent a coded signal. Moments later, his teammates struck from 3 different directions simultaneously. Skitter dropping from above, Drift seeping through ventilation systems, and Boulder smashing through a wall that the Krillians hadn't even considered defending. The remaining Krillian squad was eliminated in seconds. "Squad 7 eliminated," came the announcement from the exercise controllers. Krillian forces neutralized. But Tejo was already moving toward his next target. Through his earpiece he could Hear Thorax's Gorvani squad communicating as they moved through the industrial sector. Their pack mentality made them predictable. They would stick together, move in formation, and rely on overwhelming force. Perfect. As he approached their position, Tae-ho began making subtle changes to his appearance and movement. He stumbled, slightly breathed harder, even added a fake limp to his stride. When the Gorvani spotted him, they saw exactly what he wanted them to see: a wounded enemy, separated from his team and easy prey. "There's the human!" Thorax's voice boomed across the industrial complex. "He's hurt! All units converge on my position!" The Gorvani pack mentality kicked in immediately. Instead of maintaining their defensive positions, they all rushed toward what they thought was a vulnerable target. Their formation collapsed as they competed to be the first to eliminate the famous human recruit. Tae-ho led them on a chase through the industrial maze, always staying just barely within sight, always appearing to be on the verge of collapse. The Gorvani followed eagerly, their battle rage building with each near miss. "Almost got him," Brutok called out as a plasma bolt scorched the wall inches from Tae-ho's head. "He's slowing down," added another warrior. "Few more seconds and—" That's when Tae-ho triggered the trap. The industrial sector was filled with automated machinery for the training exercises, robotic systems that could be controlled by anyone with the right access codes, codes that Tae-ho had memorized during his first week at the academy, while his tormentors thought he was just wandering around lost. Heavy manufacturing equipment activated simultaneously throughout the complex. Conveyor belts began moving at high speed. Robotic arms swung into motion. Warning klaxons blared as safety systems engaged. The tightly packed Gorvani squad found themselves scattered and disoriented as the environment itself turned against them. Some were knocked down by moving machinery. Others were separated by conveyor belts that carried them in different directions. The coordinated pack became a collection of confused individuals. Tae-ho moved through the chaos like he owned it. His training weapon, picking off targets with mechanical precision. Each shot was carefully planned, each movement calculated to take advantage of the psychological profiles he had developed. "Target down. Moving to extraction point," he reported calmly over the comm system as Thorax's paralyzed form disappeared. Behind a moving assembly line. "How?" came Thorax's stunned voice through the comm. "How did you know about the machinery controls?" "I read the manual," Tae-ho replied simply. "You should try it sometime." Within minutes, the entire Gorvani squad was eliminated, but Tae-ho wasn't finished yet. The Zephyrite tactical group was his final challenge, and in many ways the most dangerous. Unlike the emotionally driven Krillians or the pack-minded Gorvani, the Crystal Warriors fought with cold logic and perfect communication, or at least they tried to. As Tae-ho approached their position in the eastern hills, he began to hum again. But this time the frequency was very specific. Exactly 347.2 Hz, the resonant frequency that disrupted Zephyrite communication crystals. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Zephyrite network, which allowed them to coordinate perfectly and share information instantly, began to break down. Their synchronized movements became jerky and uncoordinated. Their tactical communications turned into static-filled confusion. "What's happening to our network?" Prism's voice crackled with interference. "I can't establish connection with squad members." "Unknown interference source," came the fragmented reply. "Possible equipment malfunction or the transmission cut off entirely as Tae-ho's humming reached its full effect." The Zephyrite squad, robbed of their greatest advantage, found themselves fighting as individuals against an enemy who understood them better than they understood themselves. The battle was over almost before it began. "Exercise complete," came the announcement from the control room. "All opposing squads eliminated. Victory to Squad 12. As the paralysis effects wore off and the eliminated recruits began to regain mobility, they found Tae-ho waiting for them with that same pleasant smile he had worn throughout the entire exercise. "Good effort, everyone," he said warmly. "Thorax, if you had maintained formation instead of charging blindly, you might have actually tagged me back there. And Vorth, your squad's defensive positioning was actually quite good. You just need to work on emotional control under pressure." The alien stared at him in stunned silence. He had just systematically dismantled 3 squads of elite warriors, and now he was offering tactical advice like a patient instructor. The Zephyrite network coordination was impressive too, Taeho continued, turning to Prism. If not for the communication disruption, you probably would have had me. Might want to develop some backup communication protocols that don't rely on crystal resonance. As he walked away, leaving behind a group of warriors who were beginning to understand that they had been playing checkers while he was playing three-dimensional chess, Taeho made one final entry in his notebook. Phase 2 complete. Tactical. Capabilities confirmed. Psychological warfare applications successful. Ready to proceed to final phase. The student was about to become the teacher, and the academy would never be the same. The training complex fell silent, except for the soft hum of medical drones checking on the paralyzed recruits. Kim Taeho stood in the center of what had been a battlefield just minutes before, calmly cleaning his training weapon, while alien warriors slowly regained feeling in their limbs. The first to recover was Sergeant Vorth. The massive Krillian pushed himself up on his forearms, shaking his head to clear the lingering effects of the neural shock. For a long moment, he just stared at the small human who had single-handedly dismantled his entire squad. Then he did something that no one expected. He walked over to Taeho and stood at attention. "Permission to speak freely, Cadet Kim," Vorth said, his voice carrying a tone that the other recruits had never heard before. There was no mockery in it, no condescension, just the careful respect of one professional soldier addressing another. Taeho looked up from his weapon maintenance, slightly surprised. "Of course, Sergeant." "You studied us like enemies," Vorth said quietly, his compound eyes reflecting something the human had never seen there before, genuine respect. "Every weakness, every habit, every psychological trigger. You turned our own instincts against us." Taeho finished checking his weapon and slung it over his shoulder. "No, Sergeant," he replied, meeting the alien's gaze directly. "I studied you like future allies who needed to learn an important lesson about respect. There's a big difference." The words hung in the air as other recruits began to gather around them. Thorax limped over, still shaking off the effects of paralysis, followed by the remaining members of his Gorvani squad. Even Prism and her Zephyrite warriors approached, their crystal bodies flickering with confused patterns of light. "Allies?" Thorax asked, his voice uncertain. "After what we put you through?" Taeho smiled, but this time it was warm and genuine. "You think I came here to get revenge? To prove humans are superior? That's not what this was about at all." He gestured around the training complex, where automated systems were already beginning to reset the environment for the next exercise. "Earth didn't send me here to show off or to humiliate anyone. We sent me here to learn and to teach." The crowd of alien recruits exchanged confused glances. This wasn't how they expected a victory speech to go. "Teach what?" Prism asked, her crystalline voice chiming with curiosity. "That assumptions can be deadly," Taeho replied. "How you all assumed that because I looked different, because I came from a world you'd never heard of, because I used primitive tools like paper notebooks, that I must be weak, inferior, not worth taking seriously." He pulled out his notebook and held it up so everyone could see it. "This primitive tool helped me collect more intelligence in 3 weeks than your advanced neural interfaces gathered in months of training together. Not because it's better technology, but because none of you thought it was worth paying attention to." The implications of his words began to sink in. They had been so focused on obvious displays of strength and technology that they had completely missed the real threat. "In warfare," Taeho continued, "the enemy who surprises you is the one who kills you. Today you learned what it feels like to be completely outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated. Better to learn it here, in training, than on a real battlefield, where the consequences are permanent." Instructor Kelvar approached the group, his crystal body still flashing in agitated patterns. "Cadet Kim, report to command immediately. Admiral Zelix wants to speak with you personally." As Taeho walked away, the alien recruits were left to contemplate what had just happened. The human they had tormented for weeks had just given them a masterclass in psychological warfare, while treating it like a routine training exercise. 2 hours later, Taeho sat in the Academy's command center, facing a panel of the most senior military officers in the galaxy. Admiral Zelix, an ancient Krillian whose battle scars spoke of centuries of warfare, leaned forward in his chair, Cadet Kim, the Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, your performance today has raised some interesting questions. Questions that go far beyond a simple training exercise. Taeho sat at attention, but remained calm. Yes, sir? Our intelligence services have been wondering about Earth for some time, Zelix continued. A world that appears primitive on the surface, yet produces individuals capable of this. He gestured toward a holographic replay of the day's war games. Tell me, is Earth's primitive status genuine? Taeho considered the question carefully, then smiled. Performance art, sir. The panel erupted in surprised murmurs. Zelix raised one of his 4 hands for silence. Explain, the Admiral commanded. Earth has been observing galactic civilization for decades, Taeho replied matter-of-factly. We've studied your wars, your politics, your military doctrines, your species' psychological profiles. We knew that when we finally introduced ourselves, we would need to prove that humanity deserves to be taken seriously. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The 3 human cadets here at the Academy, we're not just students. We're advanced scouts, sent to gather intelligence and establish relationships. My specific mission was to assess galactic military culture and determine the best methods for integration. Admiral Zelix's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And your assessment? Promising, Taeho replied. Your species are strong, brave, and skilled warriors, but you're also predictable, because you rely too heavily on assumptions based on physical appearance and technological displays. That makes you vulnerable to psychological warfare and unconventional tactics. The room fell silent as the officers processed this information. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just dealing with an unusually talented recruit. They were facing a representative of an entirely new kind of military philosophy. What happens now? Asked General Korath, a massive Govani, whose tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the galaxy. Now I complete my mission, Taeho said simply. Phase 1 was intelligence gathering. Phase 2 is integration and optimization. I'll continue training here, but now I'll be working with your instructors to develop new tactical doctrines that combine the best of human and alien approaches to warfare. That evening in the mess hall, the atmosphere was completely different from 3 weeks earlier. Instead of mockery and isolation, Taeho found himself surrounded by eager alien recruits asking questions about human tactics and psychology. How did you know about the machinery controls? Brutok asked, still amazed by the industrial sector ambush. I read the technical manuals during my first week, Taeho replied. While you were all focusing on physical training, I was learning about the infrastructure and support systems. Information is the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. Thorax, who had once led the betting pool against Taeho's survival, now competed with others for the humans' tactical advice. The betting's changed, he mentioned awkwardly. Now they're taking odds on which galactic threat you'll accidentally solve during next week's training. Taeho laughed at that. I'm not here to solve threats. I'm here to help you solve them yourselves more effectively. He pulled out his notebook one final time and made an entry. Phase 1 complete. Aegis recommends proceeding to Phase 2. Integration and optimization of galactic defense networks. Psychological resistance minimal. Cultural exchange protocols successful. Looking up at the faces around him, former enemies who were becoming allies, warriors who were becoming students, Taeho felt a sense of satisfaction. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. You know, he said casually, closing the notebook, there's something I should probably mention. Earth's real military is still in development. What you've seen from me, I'm just reconnaissance. The mess hall gradually fell silent as his words spread from table to table. Alien warriors who had just witnessed a single human systematically dismantle their best tactical formations began to contemplate the implications. If this was humanity's advanced scout, their intelligence gatherer, their diplomat, their B team, what would happen when Earth's actual warriors decided to introduce themselves to the galaxy? The thought sent a collective shiver through the room. Some species found it terrifying, others found it exciting. All of them found it fascinating. In the span of 3 weeks, Kim Taeho had transformed from the Academy's laughingstock into its most feared and respected recruit. He had proven that strength came in many forms, that intelligence could overcome any physical disadvantage, and that the most dangerous enemy was the one you never saw coming. But more than that, he had shown them something they had never considered. Before that, the small, unremarkable human sitting quietly in the corner might be the most important person in the room. The galaxy was about to get very interesting, and it would never be the same again. Earth had finally come to play.